Hey guys, welcome back. It's Ripe again, back with more neighbor stories. In this video, an entitled neighbor tore the roof of my garage to spite me and then claimed that I was encroaching on his property, which is a complete lie. Here is what happened. Let's dive right into the video. And the first one starts like this. I live alone and I like it that way. I chose a job as a remote website consultant to complement my pleasant isolation. This also meant social contact was kept to a minimum for family and even less for neighbors. That changed when a close family member passed away unexpectedly and I inherited a lifetime's worth of documents, photographs and trinkets. With little space in my house, I was forced to keep in my garage until I had the time or energy to properly sort them. It was around the same time that we had some rain in the middle of a week-long heat wave. All the lawns and flowers in the neighborhood were thankful for the drink, all apart from the neighbor's flower bed, which was tucked under my garage roof. I did not think at the time it was going to be a problem, but other people had different takes on that. A few nights later, I woke up to an almighty crashing noise from outside, but when I went to investigate, I saw no sign of disturbance. I found it the next morning as sunlight streamed in through a window to my driveway. This would not usually be odd except for the fact that it's never had light before, in a position that it's blocked by the roof of my garage. The roof was now gone, along with a number of bricks from the wall holding it up. The theft was clumsy and destructive, leaving a mess both inside my garage and all around it. I was dumbstruck at the attempt, let alone the sheer spite that he required to commit to it. Luckily, there was only one suspect in mind, and the trail of mess over to his property showed that he did not worry about hiding his tracks either. My neighbor made no attempt to play dumb at his crime. He displayed a smugness or spiteful pride at his handiwork instead. In his words, he was full in his rights to remove the obstruction after a survey proved that my garage roof was actually, or supposedly, on his property. When I asked to see the survey, he refused to cooperate, telling me to get over it and that it's already done. After a few minutes of getting nowhere, I told him that I was gonna put back the roof and proceeded to walk back to my yard. A firm hand pulled on my shirt as I looked back and I saw him in anger. He warned me that there would be consequences if I did that, and I believed him. He continued to demand that if I wanted my roof back, I had to move the garage away from his property or else he would report me to the city. I nearly chuckled at the absurd remark. That he could somehow consider himself the victim here was remarkably stupid. The neighbor did not apologize, he was not sorry, and by no means would he relent to paying for the damages. This was someone that could simply not be reasoned with, so I decided to stop trying and just take another approach. Doing my due diligence and not totally buying his survey story, I decided to dig into the property records myself. After a few hours of cross-referencing my own paperwork to the public records, I'm able to confidently and legally prove that my garage was solely on my property and did not overhang onto my neighbor's land like he claimed. He was right that the property lines did not match the deeds, but it was him that was on my property instead. As he was only over by a few inches, had he not been such a prick recently, I might have let the matter go, but now I intended to return his karma in full. I went back to talk to the neighbor that same day after dinner. I wanted to try reasoning with him one last time before revealing my ace in the hole. As expected, the neighbor did not budge in his stance at all, even getting more aggressive and threatening legal action against me if I bring it up again. So I made copies of my paperwork showing the real property borders and left it on his doorstep. The papers were gone the next morning, but he didn't confront me about it. I watched from my bedroom window as he invited a surveyor over again and showed him around the property. After some consideration, I could hear the surveyor agree with my paperwork, much to the annoyance of my neighbor, who immediately flipped out and tried to argue it. I waited a little before going outside and talking to my neighbor, who was still staring at his yard long after the surveyor had left. I first pretended I hadn't heard their conversation, talking to him about how my lawyer was getting ready to fight it out in court soon. His face turned a ghoulish pale. My neighbor immediately apologized and offered to pay the cost of a new roof, stumbling over his words in what I imagine was panic and desperation. He offered to call up the local construction companies to get quotes and appointments available, which I let him do while I chilled out and had a beer. He came back to me with his homework 20 minutes later and gave me a number of reasonable options and that each could start next week. I said that I was not too happy about leaving the roof off that long in case it rained, and made some more mentions of a lawsuit under my breath. He quickly scuttled off and had somehow arranged someone to fix it the next morning, so I asked and found out later he practically begged and offered to double the pay. A week passed without as much as a cloud in the sky. My property had gained a few inches to match the deeds, and my new roof is now bigger than the old one. I designed the roof differently to overhang a little further out while still on my property. My neighbor got his fence moved and moved his flower bed across his yard. The incident is still the talk of the neighborhood, much to my troubling neighbor's annoyance, but his attitude to it is enough that I keep bringing it up as subtle revenge. I doubt he'll try to pull up any funny business with his rights or what his property was anymore. And now we have an update to the story. It reads like this. A few weeks after the roof incident, things had settled down with the neighbor. He avoided me like the plague, which was just fine by me. I was content to move on and enjoy my new bigger garage roof in peace. That all changed one sunny Saturday morning when I was doing some yard work. The neighbor came marching over, red-faced and fuming. Apparently his flower bed was not getting enough sunlight with my new garage overhang. "You need to take that monstrosity down right now," he shouted, getting in my face. "It's blocking all the light and killing my petunias." I stood my ground and said, "The roof is perfectly legal and on my property. Your flower issue is not my problem." He sputtered angrily. "We will see about that. I'm calling the city inspectors. They will make you take it down." And with that he stormed off. I just shook my head and went back to raking leaves. If he wanted to waste the city's time, that was his choice. Sure enough, a few days later, a truck from the city planning office pulled up and 2 inspectors with clipboards hopped out and started examining my garage roof again, measuring tapes in hand. I waited patiently on the lawn as they did their job. After about 20 minutes, they seemed satisfied. One of the inspectors came over and said, "Everything looks up to code here." She told me matter-of-factly, "Your new roof addition is fully within your property lines and meets all zoning requirements." The neighbor who had been watching from his window erupted, "That's impossible! Do your jobs properly!" But the inspectors just shrugged and got back in their truck, one last glare at me from the neighbor, and then they drove off. So much for that ploy from the neighbor, but I knew it wouldn't be the end of his attempts to hassle me. A week or so later, I was grilling some steaks out back when I was approached by a man in a cheap suit. "Mr. Henderson?" he asked, not waiting for me to confirm before continuing. "I'm from the Pearson law firm. You're being served with a civil lawsuit from your neighbor, Mr. Benson." He handed me a manila envelope stuffed with legal documents. I quickly flipped through them. The neighbor was suing me for private nuisance, claiming the new garage roof was causing an unreasonable interference with his property by blocking sunlight. I could not help but laugh out loud. The guy gave me a confused look as I signed for the documents. "Don't worry, this will get tossed out so fast," I assured him. Pretty sad honestly when a guy has to sue over a few petunias. His lips twitched in amusement before he headed back to his car. Yeah, I would have to take this seriously, but the neighbor's case was so flimsy, I was not too concerned. My lawyer urged me not to get overconfident, but agreed the lawsuit didn't have much legal merit. Lack of sunlight alone is a very tough bar for private nuisance claims. She drafted a strong motion to dismiss. When the court date arrived a few months later, the neighbor's lawyer looked simultaneously nervous and arrogant as he made his arguments about the garage roof being an unreasonable non-trespassory invasion that had ruined his client's use and enjoyment of the flower bed. I tried not to laugh out loud at the melodrama. The judge, an older woman who didn't seem impressed, asked a few pointed questions that poked holes in the neighbor's logic, and then it was my lawyer's turn. She surgically dismantled the nuisance claim, citing all the legal precedents about much more extreme cases of blocked views and sunlight being rejected. By the end, she had me feeling sorry for the neighbor's lawyer. The judge did not even pause before granting the motion to dismiss and tossing out the lawsuit. She leveled the neighbor's lawyer with a steely gaze. "This case is clearly frivolous. If I see any more attempts to litigate this issue, I will seriously consider sanctions for wasting the court's time. We are done here." With that, she threw her gavel down with finality and strode out. The neighbor looked dumbfounded like he couldn't believe that he had lost. His lawyer quickly gathered up his briefcase and led his client out with a hand on his back. As I walked out behind them, I could not resist a final jab. "Hey neighbor, sorry about your petunias." He whipped around with a snarl, but thankfully thought better than trying anything. Sometimes you just have to have the last word. In the months that followed, peace finally reigned again between our properties. The neighbor nursed his wounds in silence, clearly learning his lesson about pushing bogus legal threats. For me, I enjoyed my lovely new garage roof at every opportunity. I set up some patio furniture underneath the overhang and would sit outside reading on nice days, protected from the elements. Basically, my own little sun-soaked oasis. Occasionally, I could see the neighbor shooting contemptuous looks my way from his puny flower bed. I always made sure to give a friendly wave and smile back. That simple gesture of good-natured defiance probably infuriated him more than anything, but I did not care. Honestly, after all the headaches he put me through, getting to rub a little salt in the wound felt pretty satisfying. More importantly, I had stood up for myself through legal means and came out on top. The whole saga showed that I wouldn't just roll over for a bully who thought they could push me around. I was willing to firmly defend what was mine without stooping to his level of pettiness and recklessness. Edit. Some people in the comments were curious as to how the neighbor actually removed the roof of my garage. Well, he did it by simply driving in with his little minivan and then driving back out with the roof on the roof of his car. It's hard to explain because it was so stupid. And the next one is another neighbor revenge story. And by the way, Ripe Stars, this is basically a new format I'm trying. Let me know what you think about this idea to, in one video, have stories that are kind of similar. Basically, if the first story is about a neighbor getting revenge, the next one would be about something similar. What do you think about this? I've seen other channels do it, and in my opinion it's kind of interesting, but I also like to have more variety, to be honest. But then again, in the end, I want to do what's most interesting for you. So let me know your feedback in the comments. Thank you very much. So, my neighbors can act rather unneighborly, especially when they are having a family get-together. The backstory is that they regularly party until 2 AM Sunday through Monday. Their guests park their cars awkwardly on the road, so it's difficult to maneuver around them, and they let their dogs crap on the community gardens without picking up. Annoying, but not a hill to die on. I also suspect that the dad is an alcoholic, as I see him staggering up his driveway most evenings. Recently, he bought a BMW convertible, and I have a Ring camera that picks up a part of their driveway, both film and sound. I can tell it's his pride and joy by the way he throws out the stats on it when showing it off to visitors. Last night I went outside to take my bin to the end of the driveway, ready for next day collection, and saw a key fob on the floor at the end of our driveway next to the neighbor's bin. I glanced up his driveway and saw the car top was down. So I just nudged the fob under his bin with my foot and went back inside my home. I went on my Ring to see that the man had driven up his driveway, struggled to get out of his car, dragged the bin to the bottom of his driveway, and then swaggered back, obviously drunk. He must have dropped his keys in the process. I chuckled and went to bed. Last night it rained really hard. I left the house before the neighbors outside. I cannot wait to check my Ring camera footage later. Update, same day 9 hours later. I'll keep this short. I checked the bin when I got home and the keys were still hidden, so I picked them up. The car was gone, so I looked at the Ring camera recording and saw that the wife came out of her house and walked down to her bin with a bag of rubbish about an hour after I left the house. She walked up the driveway, stopped at the car and leaned in, I'm assuming to check whether the car was damp, and then rushed into the house. The next hour was essentially a lot of the husband and wife going in and out of the house, leaning into the car and screaming at each other. The wife kept screaming, "You promised me!" and the husband debating that he did it. Then the husband came back out and tried to start the car with a spare key, started shouting profanities again when it wouldn't start. He got on the phone to someone explaining the damage, and a few hours later, a tow truck took the car away. It's been silent since then. I have the key, not sure what I'm gonna do with it, but I know I'm not going anywhere near them in the mood they were in. I'm imagining dropping the roof down next time he comes back drunk so his wife can lose her crap at him again when she sees he's done it again. Relevant comments. You have an obligation to report this if you have evidence of him drunk driving. And OP responded, I contacted the non-emergency police last year about the state he was driving and what I saw on my camera, and they told me that the recording would be circumstantial evidence at best. I asked if someone would pick him up while he was driving home, and they responded with they don't have the resources to do that. It was a disappointing and frustrating conversation. And another person said, throw the dog poop in the car with the top down. And then OP responded, people have recommended that, but I'm not sure whether the house has a camera as well. May not be a Ring one, as I've never heard the tones. I like the idea of messing with his car without actually being caught on camera, so dropping the top or making the alarm go off can be done from a distance and be made to look like drunk husband accidentally did it himself when he parked up. And now we have an update to the story that reads like this. Well, the car is back. It is sitting on neighbor's driveway with the top up. I haven't seen the husband drunk and driving recently, but that may be because his wife seemed to be the chauffeur at the moment. I was just gonna throw the keys onto their driveway so they could find them another day, but last night they had another family gathering and didn't turn the music off until 4 AM. I watched the other neighbors knocking on their door, the cops called, and then when everyone went away, they cranked the music back up. So now I'm gonna wait until the next time he comes home drunk and it's rainy night and I'm going to drop the top down using the fob. And yeah, Ripe Stars, if you had such a drunk, idiotic neighbor, what would you have done if you were in OP's shoes? Let me know in the comments. And honestly guys, one of the things I really dislike the most is people drunk driving. You know, usually people say that Thailand is maybe one of the, if not the most dangerous country to drive in, and I would say that is certainly true to some regard, at least when you look at the statistics. The road deaths every year, and probably even every day, are just through the roof here, and it's absolutely insane. But honestly, if you get used to the traffic, and if you drive respectfully and flow with the traffic, then it's not too bad here. Just one of the things I really dislike here is that people really enjoy drunk driving, and I think it's one of the #1 causes for accidents and traffic deaths. Especially when you combine drunk driving with driving a scooter with like 4 or 5 people on it without helmets. Obviously, that's a recipe for disaster that really bumps up those statistics. And the next one is an Am I the A-hole story. When I moved cities a few months ago, I rented an apartment on a monthly contract while looking for another one to buy. A couple months in, the owner told me that she will be putting it on the market, so she will be needing my schedule to arrange showings. I offered to buy it, and not even 2 weeks later, I was the owner of my own apartment. I live in the 2nd floor, and the 1st floor is owned by a family, father, mother and 2 teen boys, and the ground floor is 2 garages for cars and 1 for each owner. And finally, the roof is split into 2 roofs with an 8-foot wall and separate doors off of the landing. When I bought my house, I wanted to redo the kitchen and bathroom, so I took some cookies and knocked on my neighbor's house door to ask for their schedule. I did not want to do work while they were at home to avoid bothering them. That day, I was in my balcony and heard the husband complaining about me buying the apartment. Apparently they were planning to do so, but I beat them to it. Now fast forward a couple of months and I've turned my roof into a garden with raised beds for my veggies, pots for flowers, some garden furniture and an area with some wooden outside tiles. While coming out one day, I met my neighbor and she asked to see the garden with her sons. I showed it off and thought that was the end of it. That is until I started noticing how some of my flowers were cut, the furniture was moved, etc. So I installed a camera and saw that her sons jump over the dividing wall along with some friends and spent their time there. I told the parents and asked them to tell their kids to stop, that most of the time I'm not at home, and if something happened there is no way to open the door to help them, metal door with a huge padlock. They said okay, but the kids continued to do so. They even started destroying my plants for telling on them. So I gave their mother an ultimatum, they either stop or I'll be calling the cops. She scoffed and called me an entitled witch. The next time I got an alert on my phone, I called the cops and said someone broke into my rooftop garden. They came pretty fast and only one kid managed to escape. The other one was caught red-handed and taken to the precinct. Their father almost broke my door and started screaming at me to come and drop the charges. I just threatened to call the cops on him as well and went to bed. This morning I went to the precinct and dropped the charges, so he spent the night in their jail with, according to his mom, drug dealers and thugs. I was so sure of my decision that I was teaching him the consequences of his actions, but my mom said that I was too harsh. She said that I punished the parents, not that I taught the kid a lesson. So Reddit, am I the a-hole? And yeah, Ripe Stars, let me know in the comments what you think about this story. Do you think that OP is the a-hole here or not? Comment number 1, not the a-hole, not even remotely the a-hole. You talk to them and you talk to them again. They, instead of disciplining their kids, basically left you with no other choice. Hell, with that kind of attitude, frankly, you would still never be the a-hole even if you did not drop the charges. Probably shouldn't have. Probably should have called the cops on the father too. I know you need peace where you live, but they jumped so far over the reasonable behavior line that an Olympic vaulter would be jealous. Comment number 2, not the a-hole. Your neighbors are entitled a-holes and one day their son will get in more serious trouble and it will be all their fault. I would not have dropped the charges. The next one is titled, HOA fined me for not mowing my unused farmland. I could not believe the letter I received in the mail. It was from the Oak Hills Homeowners Association, fining me $200 for not keeping my unused farmland properly maintained. The thing is, I'm not even a member of this Oak Hills HOA. My name is John and I own a small farm just outside the Oak Hills development. My property shares a border with the HOA, but that's about it. I have lived here peacefully for 15 years, tending my cows and growing crops on my 50 acres of land. Oak Hills is one of those fancy neighborhoods with rules for everything, aka what color you can paint your shutters, when you can put up holiday decorations, all that crap. I chose to live outside of it for a reason. The letter stated that I had 2 weeks to mow and maintain my field adjacent to their neighborhood, or I would continue accruing fines. It was signed by Gary Willis, the president of the HOA. Can you believe the nerve of this guy? I didn't know who he thought he was, but I was not about to be bullied into mowing land I use for grazing cattle and growing feed. The next weekend I saw Gary out for a stroll in the neighborhood. He waved politely as he walked by my farm. I marched right up to him and got in his face about the ridiculous letter. Just what do you think you're trying to pull, sending me fines for land that I don't even have to maintain for you? I asked him point blank. He got a little flustered but quickly recovered. Well, John, I understand this is your property, but we really must insist you keep the area next to our neighborhood trimmed and orderly. We strive for a clean-cut image here at Oak Hills. I could not believe his audacity. Listen here, Gary, I'm no member of your HOA, and this is my private farmland. I'll do with it as I please, and don't take kindly to threats disguised as fines. At this point, Gary started to get angry. Now, you see here, we have standards to uphold. Do you realize property values will plummet if it looks like we have to live next to an unkept junk heap? I don't care if you're a part of our HOA or not. You will maintain that field or I'll see to it your fines increase tenfold. Now it was my turn to get angry. This pompous blowhard had some nerve trying to tell me what to do on my own damn property. Is that so? I would like to see you try and enforce your little threats. I spat back. This is my land that I use for my farm. I don't have time to waste mowing a perfect lawn just to appeal to your ridiculous standards. Gary's face turned red with anger. You will regret this, John. I'll make sure you learn your place around here. And with that he turned and stormed off. I'll admit the guy's threats worried me a bit, but I tried not to think about it too much over the next few days. Then the following week I got another letter stating that I now owed $1,000 in fines for failure to maintain my property per HOA guidelines. And there was another letter taped to my door saying I had 24 hours to complete the mowing or the fines would go up to $5,000. Now I was really seeing red. There was no way I was caving to this nonsense. I decided it was time to do some digging into Gary Willis and his heavy-handed HOA tactics. A few conversations with some Oak Hill residents revealed that Gary had angered a lot of folks with his aggressive governance. They said Gary was known to target and harass anyone who did not toe the line. One person even claimed that they suspected him of embezzling HOA dues, but no one had been able to prove it. Armed with this new information, I came up with a plan to turn the tables on Gary. I decided I would pretend to finally cave to his demands about the mowing. The next day, I left Gary a message saying I would take care of the field per his instructions. As I expected, a smug Gary appeared at my property line just as I finished up the last stretch of mowing later that day. Well, John, I'm glad you finally came to your senses. He gloated, clearly taking pleasure in my perceived submission. Yeah, Gary, you really convinced me that I need to keep this place looking tidy, I said, laying it on thick. In fact, I was hoping we could get a drink in town later so I could learn more about how your HOA operates. I figure it could help prevent any misunderstandings in the future. Gary readily agreed to meet me at a bar later that evening, obviously eager to assert his authority further. Once we were both settled at a table with drinks, it was time to put my plan into motion. You know, Gary, I would love to see a copy of the Oak Hills bylaws if you have them handy, I said innocently. I want to be sure I know all the rules so there are no issues in the future. Of course, I just happen to have a copy right here, Gary replied, pulling a document from his jacket pocket and handing it over. I scanned through the pages buying time while I was recording our conversation on my phone in my lap. After a few minutes of pretending to read, I looked back up. This is great, but I don't see anything that says you can dictate what I do on my own private property. Can you show me where it says that? Gary's smug expression wavered slightly and he shifted in his seat. Well, it doesn't explicitly state that per se, but as a president I have discretion to enforce the standards however I see fit. I decided to push him further. Interesting. You know, another thing I was told is that some people suspect you of misusing HOA dues. Any truth to that? At this point, Gary turned red and slammed his fist down on the table angrily. Who told you such lies? I've done no such thing. The HOA money goes towards neighborhood beautification and events, nothing more. Anyone who tells you otherwise is a liar. I held up my hands in a calming gesture and said, hey, sorry man, no need to get all worked up. I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation. After that, Gary seemed eager to wrap up our chat and hurried out shortly after finishing his drink. I thanked him for his time and promised I would stay on top of my field, but I had what I needed. The next week, I submitted copies of the HOA bylaws as well as the recordings of Gary's lies and temper to the County HOA Oversight Board along with a formal complaint. A few weeks later, I received notice that Gary had been removed as president pending an audit of the HOA's accounting records. It turns out my hunch was right and the audit uncovered clear evidence he had siphoned off nearly $15,000 in HOA dues to his personal accounts over the last several years. Gary was arrested and charged with fraud and embezzlement. I also made sure the sheriff paid him a visit to inform him all fines against me had been invalidated and any attempt to bill me further would constitute harassment. Last I heard, Gary was sentenced to 2 years in prison and had to pay back all the money he stole with interest. Oak Hill's got a new HOA president who seems much more reasonable, and they no longer bother me about my property on their border. All's well that ends well, I guess. My little farmland taught that corrupt HOA president a lesson he won't soon forget. And yeah guys, if you cannot get enough of my content, please don't forget to check out my podcast by searching for Ripe Stories on all major podcast platforms such as Spotify, Apple or Google Podcasts. Furthermore, you can find bonus content by going to patreon.com/ripeyoutube or by clicking the join button here on YouTube. For a small monthly fee, you will get access to dozens and dozens of exclusive videos you won't find anywhere else. Thank you so much for watching and I hope to see you again tomorrow.